event.
Right.
Give me my wheelbarrow full of gold and I'm going to go off and do something else. The problem is they've spent their whole life doing this
Yeah.
and they're going to have a non-compete. So, you give them a wheelbarrow full of gold and they're back at
Mhm.
square one. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why do that?
And
Why
do
sell a
and what do
great
I do
company?
now?
But I think predominantly for me, it was the military provided an education.
Mhm.
The military forced me to grow up, discipline, teamwork, leadership.
Mhm.
And I was Soldier of the Year in 1984,
Wow.
which was a big deal. And a matter of
Yeah.
fact, I remember when I got out of the service, up until that point, he's like, what the hell are you doing as an engineer? I'm a guy in my 20s who is at a glass ceiling making
Yeah.
six figures, and I'm doing really well, and starting to get into management and leadership, and so he offered me a shot, a two-digit number plus your net worth as a two-digit number, the percent of your net worth that's tied up in your company.
Mhm.
And so I'm 60, and like most entrepreneurs, if they've got 80-90% of their net worth tied up in their company, you add those two numbers together, maybe it's 80 plus 60, that's 140. If
Mhm.
it's over 130, too much risk. Too
Yeah.
much risk buried in your business. We want to sell it.
Did you know there's a technology that's actually an app on your phone that uses sound waves to tell your brain what you want your brain to do? We had a young man that was on a guest on our podcast, the Mike Litton Experience, who had a traumatic brain injury. He was sleeping 3 hours a night. He's using Newcalm now and he's sleeping more. Go to newcalm.com, Mike15 promo code. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. Mike is passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
Adam Coffey, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited for our time together. And like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go up to today. We want to talk about these amazing books that you've written. We want to talk about the coaching that you're doing. You have an event coming up in Dallas Fort Worth, May 3rd and 4th. We're going to talk about that too. Thanks again for being here, bud.
Mike, it's good to see you. Good to finally get this done. I know I had a flight delay one time, and we had to postpone this, so I apologize for that. But
No
hello to
worries.
all your listeners out there. It's good to be here.
Appreciate you, buddy. Thank you so much for being here. So where were you born?
I was born in Chicago, and I only lived in Chicago, Cook County Hospital. My
Yeah.
family lived in Deerfield. This is the 1960s when
Yeah.
Cook County Hospital was still open. But we moved to Michigan within a month, and so
Mhm.
I was a month old, and I grew up in a town called Birmingham, Michigan, and
Okay.
suburb of Detroit. And those were kind of my formative years. High school years, I was out in the country, still in Michigan, and so. Although I was born in Chicago, I consider myself a Michigan boy.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand. So what was your favorite thing about growing up in Michigan?
I grew up in let's call it the 1970s. That was
Mhm.
kind of I was born in 64, so I mean, I'm 6, 7 years old. It's kind of like, so my early years were in Birmingham. It was a different kind of time, different kind of era. So we had no internet. You had like 5 channels on TV. I think we had
Mhm.
6 because we had CBC in Canada,
Yep.
and so I could watch Hockey Night in Canada with Don Cherry, and I could watch, so the Canadian programs, and so it was a different era, so you didn't have the internet, no video games, no cell phones existed at that time. VCRs were just barely in existence, and they cost
Mhm.
like, $1,300-$1,400
Right.
for a VCR back
Right.
then. So what did you do? You got up and you played sports. I grew up in this neighborhood where everybody that lived on the street, dad was either a World War II vet or a Korean, war vet. And, it's apple pie, Chevrolet, and, American flags everywhere. That was
Mhm.
kind of my formative years growing up. And everything was revolved around sports. You
Yeah.
get up in the summer, big old Irish Roman Catholic families, on my street. I grew up in a household with 10 kids.
Wow.
and we weren't the biggest family on the block. There was one that had 14, and so
Wow.
it's, you get up in the summer, it's like, let's go play football, let's go play baseball, let's play
Yeah.
hockey, in the winter. So life revolved around sports and your friends. And it was an
Yeah.
era where you might leave in the morning, you'd eat lunch somewhere, somebody's house, but I might not see mom and dad again until after dark.
Right.
You wander home for food,
Yeah.
and that was just how it was.
When the sun goes down,
You
it's time
also
to come home
started
for dinner,
working
right?
early.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Talk about business career. Yeah, I started earning money by shoveling snow, raking leaves, cutting grass, and I had a paper route, I think, by the time I was 12.
Wow.
So
That's awesome,
you
man.
were industrious early, back
Yeah.
in those days.
Yeah. And you could be, right? I mean, it was just a different time. This is a completely different
It
time.
was
Of
different
all
era.
those of
Yep.
all those sports, did you have a favorite?
Oh yeah, I was a hockey guy,
Were you?
so we had tennis courts in the backyard, and in the
Mm.
winter, dad would, put the hose out and we'd freeze it up. And so I grew up, playing hockey. And because the neighborhood had tons of kids, if you were a young guy, I got stuck in goal,
Yeah.
because everybody else wanted to be Gordie Howe. They wanted to score the winning goal, of the, Stanley Cup, game
Yep.
7. And so, I'm the goalie in net. And so early on, my heroes became goalies.
Yeah.
And, after a while, it's like it really stuck. And so hockey was my main sport, but I was also a pitcher in baseball, a point guard in basketball, a midfielder in soccer. And so I was kind of a sports nut, sports kid. And, but I'd say hockey has always been my main sport, my main love.
Gotcha. In high school, did you have a favorite subject?
In high school, I'm gonna, electronics,
Mhm.
to be honest with you. So I grew up as a kid in the 1960s, 70s.
Mhm.
I was into electronics. It started with the CB radio craze, like in the early 70s. I moved on to ham radio.
Mhm.
There used to be this company in Western Michigan called Heathkit, and they
Mhm.
used to have a catalog of a bunch of electronic kits that you could build. And so I was building electronic kits. I had a ham radio, license. I'm doing Morse code. I'm talking to people all over the globe. And so I always had this kind of love for electronics early on, which fed later on in life. I had an engineering career, and so that, that's the nucleus of where it started, was playing with electronics and building kits and transmitters and receivers and being a ham radio guy.
Oh, that's cool. So in high school, did you have a favorite teacher?
So if I think about, just teachers in general, so it's
Yeah.
interesting because um, I had a love for writing even back then.
Mhm.
So I'd say growing up, I had a voracious appetite for reading.
Yeah.
And so if I wasn't playing sports, I was curled up in a quiet corner, reading books. And I was reading stuff like Stephen King and Tom Clancy, John Jake. So it's Cold War spy thrillers.
Yeah.
It's supernatural Stephen King stuff, and then John Jake's is historical fiction. So I
Right.
loved history, loved English, and I'd say if I had to think about who my favorite teacher was actually a guide. Dr. John Monday was his name,
Mhm.
and he taught a bunch of the different technical trades courses, but also loved my English teacher, and enjoyed English back then. But I was one of those kids where if I liked the subject, I
Mhm.
got an A.
Yeah.
And if I wasn't really interested, I'd be lucky to get a C. It's like,
Yeah.
so, I wasn't as focused on being a straight A student. It was like, if I like the course, it's an A,
Yeah.
and if I'm not, if it's not a part of my wheelhouse, then it's like, I just want to get by.
Yeah. Yeah. Get me out of here, right? So growing up,
Yeah.
who was the most influential person to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say I was raised by the neighborhood, because we
Mhm.
would, we had so many kids growing up in the house, literally
Yeah.
10 kids. So my mom and dad, we had 6. And I used to joke with people and tell them, we're the Brady Bunch, 3 boys,
Mhm.
3 girls. I'm Bobby. And I can't say that anymore because nobody knows the Brady Bunch,
Right.
but
Right.
I'm Bobby. I was the youngest boy. But 4 of my first cousins came and lived with us
Oh,
after their dad had passed away. and so they were raised with us for a while, and there were 10 kids in my house. And so that, talk about like Christmas morning coming down and looking at presents for 10 kids, and
Yeah.
mom and dad, it's like, I mean, they like took up the whole first floor.
Yeah.
It was pretty impressive.
Had to have been.
But I'd say, if I think about just growing up in general, hey, mom and dad, it's like, it's your parents, they're the
Yeah.
ones who set your moral compass. They're the ones who teach you, about values. Um, you know, Grew up, in a Roman Catholic family, going to Catholic school, and so I'd say the church was also kind of a central part,
That's
of
cool.
growing up back then too.
That's cool. So after high school, where do you go?
So I knew, going in high school, right? So something else about me. I was an NRA member as a young kid. I learned how to shoot as an 8, 9, 10
Mhm.
year old, shooting BB guns. My enjoyment of the shooting sports kind of went up. I played with GI Joes. I watched, that time frames, all these World War II movies, like
Mhm.
Patton and
Mhm.
The Longest Day, and it's like it was Midway, the first version. And so, I had this predisposition. I'm reading books about historical fiction and John Jakes and the Civil War and the American Revolution, and everybody's a vet,
Mhm.
in on the block. So I always knew I was going to go into the service. So literally right out of high school, I joined the military the summer between my junior and senior year. So before I even started my senior year of high school, I was already committed to go in the service, U.S. Army. I took my entrance exams. I maxed out. I could pick any MOS or military occupation specialty I wanted to. So I picked the longest technical school
Mhm.
because I was a kid who liked electronics and what have you. And so
Yeah.
I looked for what was the longest, technical school the military had. That's what I signed up for. And so I went into the service literally 2 weeks after my high school graduation. I started at the bottom rung of the ladder. I'm a private E1. I look up and I see bubble gum on the bottom of somebody else's shoe. That's how low on the totem pole I was. Dad was a Navy captain. No way I'm going to be in the Navy. I'm an Army guy. It's like, so run around in the woods with BB guns, wearing fatigues, as a 12-year-old, playing Army. Vietnam was on TV growing up, literally every night. So, it was, kind of a predisposition. I was going to go in the service.
Was it the infantry type action that drew you to the Army?
No, I was a glorified cable TV repairman. I joke about that, So I worked on classified air defense forward area radar systems, and
Okay.
so this is during the Cold War era. Ronald Reagan's president. He was my hero. When I
Mhm.
was in high school, and so I'm in the military working on forward area radar school or radar systems.
Mhm.
School was at NASA, Marshall Space Flight Center.
Wow.
After World War II, von Braun and all of the
Mhm.
German, scientists went to Huntsville, Alabama. That's where we developed intercontinental ballistic missiles, the Apollo rockets and what have you. And that's where NASA meets the military. So
Mhm.
NASA side's Marshall Space Flight Center, military side's called Redstone Arsenal. And
Mhm.
so I went there for school. I did basic training at Fort McClellan in Alabama. I think I still pick red Alabama clay out of my hair every once in a while, even though that was like 45 years ago. And so, had a world-class technical education,
Yeah.
and very, very cutting edge. So I used to joke and tell people, hey, I'm a cable TV repairman with an M16,
Yeah.
and I liked crawling around in the woods, and so I worked on forward area radar systems. Throw me out of an airplane or a helicopter, and I'll fix your radar for you.
That's cool. What was your favorite thing about serving in the Army?
I tell people, had I not served there,
Mhm.
I never make it anywhere else in
Yeah.
life. The
Yeah.
military taught a young version of me about discipline,
Mhm.
teamwork, and leadership. I graduated first in my class. I was distinguished honor grad. And so really enjoyed, the technical schools and the things that I was doing. but I think predominantly for me, it was the military provided an education.
Mhm.
The military forced me to grow up, discipline, teamwork, leadership.
Mhm.
And I was Soldier of the Year in 1984,
Wow.
which was a big deal. And a matter of
Yeah.
fact, I remember when I got out of the service, and I was applying for a job. I was applying for an engineering job for which I had none of the qualifications they were seeking. But the hiring manager, the vice president of engineering, happened to be an ex-Army captain, and
Mhm.
he knew what being a Soldier of the Year actually meant. And
Mhm.
so hired me, just kind of based on that basis alone. Kid, we'll figure out, where to slot you and help you along your way. And so I'd say the being a Soldier of the Year was probably the highlight of my tour. I was in 4 years active, 2 years reserves, and I could have, I could have easily stayed in for. I had a great career going.
Mhm.
I had made sergeant in 3 years. I probably would have, gone on to become a warrant officer, um, and life would have been fine. I'd be long retired by now, but I knew I wasn't going in to stay. I was kind of going in to kind of be the start of my career, to
Mhm.
professionalize, grow up, learn a skill. Back
Mhm.
in those days, not everybody was forced to college right out of high school. It's like some of us went to technical schools or trade schools.
Mhm.
And so, I knew that, this was going to be the foundation, the place to start. Knew I would eventually get out and move on.
Gotcha. So what was the one thing that sort of nudged you out of the Army?
It was kind of a predisposition. I'd say
Okay.
I was chasing money,
Yeah.
and I wasn't going to get rich,
Yeah.
working, as a sergeant in the Army. Matter of fact, I used to moonlight at a TV repair shop in Coppers Cove, Texas. I was stationed at Fort Hood, and so
Mhm.
by day I was a soldier working on multi-million-dollar, air defense radar systems. And at night, I'm doubling as your TV repair guy, fixing
Mhm.
TVs and VCRs and stereos, at a repair shop owned by of course, a retired Army guy. And so, for me, I just knew it was not the end. It was
Gotcha.
just a beginning. Matter of fact, the
Stepping
tagline back
stone.
then on TV, back then on TV,
Mhm.
the tagline you'd see on commercials is "The Army, a
Mhm.
great place to start."
Mhm.
And for a long time it was Army be all you can be, or
Yep.
Army a soldier of one, but in my era it was Army a great place to start. And that's how I looked at it. I'm
Yeah.
getting out of high school. So other kids are going off to college. I'm going to technical school, and I'm serving my country, and I'm going to, go this route. So I went in with the mindset, I'm in, get an education, GI Bill, let's VA home loan. It's like, let's use this as a foundation, but let's move on then after my tour was up.
So did you seek the Army out or did the Army recruit you?
Well, everybody was back in those days. It was both. It was
Yeah.
mutual. I wanted to go in the service. I had a predisposition. I had been studying the different MOSs. I had been
Mhm.
talking to the different branches, trying to figure out what was the best, most technical job and career path that I could take. And it happened to be Army, who would guarantee my school
Mhm.
and my duty assignments. And if I went in the Air Force, I might be screwing in light bulbs in Alaska, or learning something cool,
Right.
but it was up to them. In
Right.
in the Army, Army would guarantee me the actual school. So that's
Cool.
ultimately why I chose the Army. When I was getting out, interesting, fact is I was recruited by the CIA.
Mhm.
And I started in that process. And for anybody who's been through that, good Lord, you talk
Mhm.
about background checks and what have you. By the time they got around to me and said, "Okay, Mr. Coffey, we're done. Love to have you, join." It's like at that point, I'm like, it's a year down the road. I'm
Right.
long gone. I'm married. I've got a, kid. It's like my first job. It's like my life had moved on. They they
Yeah.
they took too long.
Yeah. Wow.
So
What was the one thing looking back that made you Soldier of the Year?
I think it was a dedication. It was a competitiveness,
Yeah.
So again, growing up playing sports, there are no participation ribbons in life, and I think we do our children a disservice by by not focusing on learning how to win, learning how to face defeat, learning how to get back up when you get knocked down. And I think we're too soft on kids, it's in some cases in today's world. So I'd say it was a competitiveness, a desire to not lose, a desire to win. I was an E4 at the time, and I was studying for my sergeant's board, for promotion, and I aced, the board, and I remember, the sergeant major and the colonel of the battalion saying, "Hey, we got to send somebody up to division, for soldier of the year." It's like, let's send this kid, and I just never lost.
Yeah.
I never lost, and so I studied, and I made sure that, I was dedicated towards wanting to win.
Yeah.
And so I just never lost,
Yeah.
that's,
There's a sort of a running theme with this podcast where we talk about parenting a lot, and we talk about the impression that we have on our children. And one of the things that I would share with my son is he was a competitive, very, very good basketball player, MVP on his high school team, all that. They lost a lot of games, and it was really disheartening for him to do that. But I always shared with him that he was always going to learn more from losing than he ever
yeah,
did from winning,
yeah.
you know? And the
Yeah,
whole thing,
yeah, go
with the
ahead. Yeah,
participation trophies and all that, the thing that bothers me about it is there's no real loser. There's no
yeah.
real loss, right? They didn't win, that's true, but there's no real sting. And the sting is what sort of makes you ponder, right? It makes you
Makes
sort
you
of
work
step,
harder.
well,
Yeah,
it makes you step
yeah,
back and go, okay, if I'd have done this, I'd have had a better chance. If I'd have done this, right? It helps you. It's like kind of like the iron sharpens iron thing, right?
yeah.
It's a sharpening thing. Um,
Yeah, I was telling you
yeah,
off camera that, my son, we're celebrating his 40th birthday this
yeah,
weekend. He is a CTO of a software company, a
mhm,
large one that's owned by, the largest technology PE firm on the planet. So we were joking, comparing notes. It's like I made CEO at 37. He
mhm,
made CTO at 37. Same age.
yeah,
But the kind of companies that I ran were boring, and didn't necessarily trade for the same kind of multiples that a software tech company trades for in these days. His company, is whenever that company sells, he'll get his first, multi-million dollar large payday. And it's like,
yeah,
chip off the old block. And I know with him, I'll always have a sofa to sleep on if
yep,
the old man ever needs it. But I mean, he's actually going to eclipse me, which I didn't think was possible, just
yeah,
by the nature of high multiples that software companies trade for. So,
good for
it's
him.
like our kids learn how to win. I
Hmm.
was an engineer. My son learned about computers in diapers, learned how to build computers, as a really young kid, first generation to grow up with a computer,
Hmm.
and, did a degree in software and programming and engineering. So he wasn't a jock, but had the driven competitive spirit, that I had. I'm going to be the best coder. I'm going to be the best, in my class,
Hmm.
type of thing. And so, I think we do disservice to our kids by not instilling that competitive service
Yeah,
and desire to want to win.
1000%. And a lot of that champion mentality comes from you, right? That a
Sure.
lot of what he learned, a lot of what he has and his values, that comes from you. And let's be honest, they want to be like us.
Yeah.
Our sons want to be like us, right? That's why
Yep.
we have to be really good, right? So that they're right because they want to be like us. So after the army, where do you go?
So that started, back in that time period, there were two paths to becoming an engineer. One
Yeah.
was, 4-year degreed professional engineer. The other way was, kind of military equivalent, military
Mhm.
equivalent schooling training. And that's the route I went. So I was called a journeyman engineer. By the time I got out, I had completed a 5,000-hour Department of Labor program. And so I checked all of the boxes. So
Right.
I start a career as an engineer. I wound up working in medical device repair and
Mhm.
engineering. And so think CAT scanner.
Mhm.
Shockingly, a CAT scanner is almost identical to a military anti-air, radar system. The only difference is the frequency. One takes a picture of the inside of a body, one takes a picture of the air and the surrounding, territory. CAT
Wow.
scanner spins around,
Yeah.
radar antenna spins around. They have transmitters, receivers, coils, it's like almost identical. And so because I
Wow.
came out of the military with a really good grasp
Yeah.
on radar systems and repairs, and I'm this technical guy from my early days, I
Sure.
just excelled at medical device, and so CAT scanners, MRIs, literally it's a giant radio transmitter that's pulsing energy into the body. And then they design all these little coils that fit different parts of your body, to receive the signal that's coming back. And
Mhm.
the magnet aligns all of your molecules, your atoms up in one. And then as the pulsing energy hits it, they go off center and then they emit a little tiny radio signal, which is then picked up by these coils. And so I was a natural for CT and MRI. And so I wound up working at independent companies. I worked at 3, and it was kind of a running joke. I worked at one, and then when I left to go to the next, the company I went to bought the one I left.
Oh,
And then
wow.
I left there to go to the next, and the company bought the one I left. And then I
Wow.
finally went to GE. I was kicking GE's ass at the time.
Mhm.
I was doing not just technical repair, but I was a regional manager, and I was also selling, against GE and taking a ton of business from them. And so GE went and got me, brought me over there, and then GE turned around and bought the company that I left.
Yeah.
So it happened 3 times. So I wind up at GE. I'm there for 10 years. I
Mhm.
start as an engineer, little known, but still exists in my garage, a mile away from here. I was getting ready to leave GE. I had written a business plan. I was going to start a business. And I had built, a very elaborate, business plan, marketing material. It's like I was within days of leaving GE as an engineer to start my own business when a new general manager over me wanted to meet with all of the what GE called the code 1 performers, so the
Mhm.
top 5%, the
Mhm.
A players. And he wanted to get to know all the A players in his organization. So he called me to his office. I went to Cincinnati to kiss the ring. And he was going through my background, my career, and everything that I had done at GE up until that point. He's like, what the hell are you doing as an engineer? I'm a guy in my 20s who is at a glass ceiling making
Yeah.
6 figures, and I'm doing really well, and starting to get into management and leadership. And so he offered me a shot to go to GE Crotonville
Mm.
and to kind of cross over into the professional world of GE managers. And he was an ex-professional football player, played for the Cleveland Browns.
Mm.
His name was Michael Martin. Very motivating person in my life early, in my career. And so I put that business plan aside.
Mhm.
I stayed at GE. I went to Crotonville, and boom, my career just took off.
Wow.
And when I got out of Crotonville, GE, like, hey, Adam, if I give you a good performing business unit, I'll never know what you got. So I'm going to give you the worst thing we have, the armpit of GE. Keep in mind, GE's #1 on the Fortune 500 list. Jack Welch
Right.
is the world's most admired
Yeah.
CEO. Tech doesn't exist. And so they give me the worst performing business unit in GE Medical, and worst to first was my motto, and literally went from worst to first in 12 months. And so
Awesome.
that cast me as a turnaround guy. And
Yeah.
so they just kept giving me bigger things to fix or bigger things to turn around. And then when Jack left, 2001, all of the GE leaders who didn't get the nod to be the next Jack, they all left too.
Yeah.
Your phone's ringing off the hook. And, lo and behold, I wind up going to run my first company. And it's a medical device, service company that competes with GE. And so, kind of it was owned by a PE firm. I didn't know what private equity was, had no
Mhm.
idea. I'm chasing money and title because that was the game of life my dad taught me.
Yeah.
Your value is what's your title on your business card, and how much money do you have in the bank. Those are the things that we use to measure success. So I'm playing the game of life as taught to me by my father. I'm chasing title and money, didn't know what PE was. First chance for me to step out and go be a CEO of a company. And I remember my mentor at GE telling me, when I went to, I'm inquiring, I'm like, geez, I've got this opportunity. What do I do? And it was GE, my mentors that said, Adam, once a president, always a president. Because of the way you came up through the ranks, the way your whole career has been coming up through the ranks, the way you climb the corporate ladder, GE's never going to see you as a potential president of a division until you go be one for somebody
somewhere else.
Yeah,
somewhere else.
Somewhere else. And so I would say my mentor, is best advice I ever got, and I've given that same advice to others now in my career. Do you stay at a Fortune 500 company and be one of 1,000, general managers, running some piece of a company with 400,000 employees, or do you take off, go to a small business, which was a turnaround, by the way, and go be president, CEO for the first time. And so, once a president, always a president. Adam, get the hell out of here, go be a president. So I took off out of there. Best advice I ever got in my entire career. And I took the chance. I decided if I had to fall back, I was a really good engineer. And so my worst case scenario in life is GE doesn't want me anymore as management, but I go right back to the guy, jumping out of airplanes and helicopters with a tool bag, right?
Yeah.
The cable TV repairman, so
Right.
I decided that there was not a lot of downside risk, and I took off and did it. And that led me to a 21-year career as a CEO, building 3 large companies for 9 different PE firms. Eventually I did learn what PE was. And eventually I did learn about what the benefits, of building companies, selling them, and getting to participate, in the transactions. And, hey, you can make some money here too. So it wasn't just title and money anymore. It was title, money, build, sell, payday, so that's where it started. It started with an ex-professional football player saying, Adam, once a president, always a president, get out of here and go be a president.
Yeah, I love that. That's great advice. I just, not every company has that, right? Not every company has somebody like him that'll sort of take you under their wing and say, okay, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
Right.
GE
awesome.
Back in those days, it was kind of like our own YPO. It was kind of like the Young Presidents Organization. It's like you had cohorts, leaders, and you had your own kind of group of people. You had formal corporate mentors, and they didn't always tell you stay at GE. Which shocking, right? Because you would think fundamental it would be, well, we can position you for your next climb up the ladder, and this guy's like, no, go be a president.
Yeah, that's so cool. So that first division that you turned around that GE gave you, that was obviously a challenge, right? What's the single most important thing you learned doing it, and what was the key to turning it around?
So I would tell you there were 2 other guys who were a part of that turnaround. There were 3 of us, and we were each managers of a business unit, and the 3 of us collectively, ran this business unit. And GE kind of ran an experiment, and they psychologically profiled and figured out what kind of, how to do this. And so I'm the rah-rah guy, I'm the ex-military guy. I'm the take the hill, follow me. I'm the gregarious, charismatic, can articulate a vision and, follow me. I can get people to aspire for more, and really dig in. But they also matched us with an analytics, I'd say someone who was not that rah-rah guy like me, but they were like FP&A. They were like, a CFO in the making. It's like very analytical. Hey, here's the 3, critical things that are wrong. If we address, look at the statistics, look at the numbers, KPIs, dashboards, all that stuff. And then the third person was kind of an operational expert, who was really good at tactical execution. Not necessarily the vision, but good at tactical execution. I was the rah-rah guy. And then we had an analytics person. They put us together, and it was that profile of people that kind of launched us. And so, here again, in the military, I learned about, teamwork, discipline, leadership. I'm working in the Jack Welch era GE, world's most admired company. Hey, Dad, look at this business card. It's like, titles and money. I'm, making, into the six figures as a guy. And this is in the 1990s, in my late 20s and into my 30s. And so, I was doing really well. Life was good. And I refused to lose. I refused to not succeed. So if I got to work 60, 80 hours a week, I'm just going to do it because I don't know how to do anything other than win. So whatever it takes, we're going to win,
Right.
and that's kind of the mindset that goes back to being a little kid playing sports. It's like, I'm going to be the goalie that makes that stop, in overtime in game 7 of the Stanley Cup. It's like, I want to be in that position. So all of these things in life for me were additive.
Yeah.
The desire to win, the work ethic, you want money. I also grew up in a fairly wealthy family, but my dad never gave anything to anybody.
Right.
It's like, I remember when I was turning 16, it's like, Adam, you want a car? Well, what are you going to do? It's like, I'm not buying you a car. It's like, I went and got a job, and I saved up money, and I actually got my boss, who was a family friend and owned a custom metal shop, to front me the money to buy the car. And then I worked it off, over the summer, and it was a 1969 Lincoln Continental Mark III that was rusted out and falling apart, but it had a 460 Hemi. And so it went from 0 to 30 in about an hour, but it went from 30 to 150, like that. Once you got that 6,000 pounds rolling, buddy, it had a Hemi, a 460 Hemi, and it just took off.
Like driving a tuna boat.
Yeah. So it's like all of these things, work ethic early, desire to win, military, teamwork, discipline, leadership, engineering, meticulous planner, and then turnaround guy within GE. It's like all of these things were just additive skills, that I built upon. And, even as a pilot, you can't take off if I don't know where I'm going. And so I have to plan the route, plan the journey, think about alternates, and so all of these things are what kind of led me to just keep on going. And then dad, title, money. That's the game of life. And so I'm chasing title, chasing money. So I never stayed at a company. GE was 10 years, but I think I held 4 different jobs, while I was in GE. And so it's like, I was always looking for what's my next opportunity? What's the next, promotional opportunity where, how do I climb the ladder? I don't just climb one ladder. There's 10 ladders on this wall, and I climb, I hit resistance, I step off, go somewhere else and keep climbing. And so I'm just trying to figure out, how do I get to the top?
Gotcha. So at some point you decide to write the Private Equity Playbook. Did you know there's an app that has no side effects that allows you to use sound waves to tell your brain what you want it to do? It's called newcalm.com, and it's amazing. It literally uses sound waves. If you want to tell your brain to go to sleep, if you want to tell your brain to recover, if you want to tell your brain to put you in peak physical state, if you want to tell your brain to focus, if you want to tell your brain to take a power nap, you can do all of these things and more with newcalm.com. Go to newcalm.com today, promo code Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off.
I did.
And
yeah.
So there are people that are listening to this, including the person you're talking to, that I'm actually in the process of writing a book.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I come across a lot in terms of feedback from people is they love listening to authors talk about what the mindset was that made them decide that they were going to write their first book. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So let me just start by just saying, I mentioned it. I was a voracious reader as a kid, loved to read. I loved to write. I hadn't mentioned this, but my next door neighbor was a retired award-winning author who took me under her wing. And, to this day, if I read stuff I was writing when I was like high school age and college age, it shocks me how good it was. So my first love was I wanted to be a writer. It was going to be fiction. Stephen King meets Tom Clancy meets John Jakes. It's like, I'm going to do all this stuff. And so I always had this love, but when I went in the military, a lot of things just kind of, put on the back burner. And so, I was walking with my dog, walking my dogs with my wife, and my wife said, it's time. Originally I wrote the book to set up a pivot.
Mhm.
So I had been a CEO for a long time, made a bunch of money, but I wasn't having fun anymore.
Yeah.
And I had been teaching in the executive MBA program, at some big universities, and loved giving back,
Yeah.
loved mentoring kind of the next generation's up and coming, talent. I've been speaking at UCLA for 15 plus years. And I've probably mentored, I don't know, hundreds, of executive MBA candidates. And these are all people who are mid 30s, that are going places. They're going to be running companies. And I wanted to make my mark on the next generation's business leaders. So I love the giving back, love the teaching. So I'm not making any money doing that. I'm making a ton of money being a CEO, but I'm not having fun anymore.
Yeah.
How do I reverse this paradigm? And so
Right.
I wanted to write the Private Equity Playbook for a few reasons. Um, just from the actual topic
Yeah.
perspective, it was because I had spent decades working in private equity backed owned companies, and the private equity that I knew was not the same as the private equity you hear on TV.
Right.
On TV, you hear the bad stuff, all the bad stories, all the horror stories. They destroy
Yeah.
business. They kill companies. I'm a guy who lives and breathes culture, and I built some really cool big ass companies with
Mhm.
private equity as my sponsors. And you know what? The private equity firms that I worked with, they did care about people, and they did
Mhm.
care about culture, and they cared about winning and success. And I remember when COVID hit. I'm a CEO. Aries Management owns me, and when COVID hit, they started a charitable foundation inside every portfolio company that they had. And Aries is one of the world's largest firms,
Mhm.
and they put six-figure sums of money into every company's foundation, and they told all the CEOs, take care of your employees, take
Mhm.
care of the people who are impacted, by COVID. And I'm like, you didn't hear about that on CNBC, or
Mhm.
on the evening news. All you hear is the bad stuff. And so
Yeah.
I wanted to write about the good stuff. I wanted to
Yeah.
write about the PE that I knew. And I also saw it grow from the time I started, of less than a trillion in assets under management, about 800 billion. Today, over 7 trillion in assets under management.
Wow.
When I wrote the Private Equity Playbook in 2018, I wrote it, came out in early 2019. There was 2.83 trillion in assets under management. So just in the last 5 years, it's gone from just under 3 trillion to over 7 trillion. PE now buys 50% of all companies bought and sold on the planet.
It's
And
incredible.
yet, I'm not kidding, Mike. If I teach a seminar and there's 1,000 business owners and wealthy, people in the room who think they know what private equity is, I can give them a really basic 10-question multiple choice quiz on private equity. 90% of the room fails.
Yeah.
So even though we've heard the term and we think we understand it, I can tell you that there's still just a very low understanding of what private equity is, how it
Yeah.
works, why I might want to partner with it, to diversify risk, get access to their capital, and multiple paydays, multiple bites of the apple. Why sell a great company once when you can sell it twice? My
Right.
personal record, 5 times in 13 years.
Right.
So it's like I wanted to educate the next generation about private equity. But the other thing I was doing is I was setting up a strategic pivot. And
Mhm.
it's like, I'm going to write this book, and that's going to set me up to walk out of the CEO suite
Mhm.
and start a consulting business, so that instead of just running one company or building one company, I can work with many. I can inspire, I can teach the next generation of business owners, and I can teach them how to find success because the odds are so stacked against them. So there was this desire from being a young kid of wanting to be a writer, but
Mhm.
then there was a desire to want to educate people about this asset class known as private equity, because I saw how it was going to change the world of business.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, I wanted to set up a strategic pivot. And so I'm out
Mhm.
walking my dog with my wife. I had been talking about doing this, and my company had just been sold recently. And she's like, what's next? What are you going to do? It's like, write that book, write that book. And so she kind of pushed me to get me kind of kick started over the edge to get started on book number one. I've written 4 now. I'm blessed. They've all been #1 bestsellers, multiple countries. I have a 5th one that's all done. I just haven't released it. I call it in the can because I'm still trying to figure out how I want to use it and sequence it.
Mhm.
And I'm already working on book 6 and book 7 and 8. I've got outlines sitting in the can, but book 6 is going to wind up being different. Even though I've got 2 waiting to go, I'm writing something different, for this book so those other 2 are just kind of hanging out there. So my plan is to continue to write books, to continue to work and speak and teach at universities. I do teach seminars globally. That's part of what I do. I work with 71 founders today, helping them learn how to troubleshoot their own business,
Hmm.
learn how to scale, and then use M&A and some of the advanced tools to their own benefit, even as a small business owner. And then I am working with private equity still. So I'm working with a bunch of private equity firms. I help them evaluate investments. I coach and mentor their CEOs. I sit on their boards of directors. So I do PE. I do work with founders, and I still write and still teach. That's my
Wow.
wheelhouse. I'm 60. I figure this is the last chapter of my career. I'm going to walk away at 70.
Are you? That's cool. So you have a seminar coming up, an event that's coming up on the 3rd and 4th of May in Dallas, Dallas area. Talk about that for a second. What is it that people, if somebody goes to attend that, what are they going to learn?
Yeah. So, when I teach a seminar, this one's a 2-day seminar. So day 1 is all about organic growth. You're a business owner. You aspire to build something great. So
Mhm.
I teach them how to analyze the fundamentals of their own business.
Okay.
Or if they don't own a business yet and they're looking to buy one, I teach them the profile of what should they be looking for? How would they know good when they found it? So I teach them how to troubleshoot or analyze,
Mhm.
and then I teach them the tools of organic growth, price, volume, pivot, tiering products and services. So I teach about all the different ways that we can grow a company organically. I start with culture, the
Mhm.
importance of culture in a business, how to troubleshoot, how to scale, grow organically. Day 2 is all about M&A. It's all
Yeah.
about how to use mergers and acquisitions as an accelerator for growth, and then how to exit, how
Yeah.
to exit for top dollar, most likely to a PE firm, because they buy
Mhm.
50% of all the companies bought and sold on the planet. So I kind of, it's like a lot of information packed into
Positioning.
a
Yeah.
2-day period. And you know what? It's kind of empire builder, private equity
Mhm.
exit strategy, all rolled into a live 2-day kind of seminar, and it constantly evolves.
Mhm.
No 2 editions for me are the same. If I go back to the first seminar I ever taught and I look at the material and compare it to the one I'm doing in May, it's like it's completely different.
Mhm.
I don't create new tools, because I do have a methodology for how I
Mhm.
immerse into a company. It's struggling. How do I build culture? How do I turn it around? How do I assess where it's broken, fix the issues, and then how do I get it to grow like it's never grown before? And
Yeah.
so I do all of this stuff. But I'm constantly learning. I learn
Mhm.
from my own, from the people I work with, or I continue to evolve. And I think that's an important part of life too, is we can't ever stop learning.
Yeah.
And so I am still learning, and I'm refining. And I wish I could take the knowledge I had, go back in time, and be that first time, CEO, back in the year 2001.
Mhm.
That would be, I do it a lot differently. So, it's not that I'm God's gift to anything. I've made tons of mistakes in my career, but I can look back now as a Monday morning quarterback,
Yeah, you've learned from them.
and I
Yeah.
can say, here's the formula, here's
Right.
the method.
Don't do this.
Yeah. A person listening out there, that they can go to a top university, and I teach at them, and they can spend 100 grand, and they can do an executive MBA for 15, 18, 24 months. And,
Mhm.
and that's one path. And it's mostly taught by people who are academically very smart, and they're
Mhm.
geniuses in their own right. Or you can do the $20 hillbilly, executive MBA, which is grab all my books, on
Mhm.
Kindle, go
Mhm.
home, and in one weekend, in 20 hours, I'll teach you everything you need to know. And I'm not a professor, but I do have $2.5 billion in exits. And
Right.
so, it's like, I'll teach you the practical journey. and you can learn it in a weekend, or in the case of a seminar, it's 2 days.
So real quick, just a couple of things. So are you still at 58 companies plus that you have purchased and sold?
Yeah, I'm losing track of how to keep track of this anymore. Because I'm not a CEO,
Right.
it's like I don't know what to count.
Right.
So
I
it's
got
like
you.
I bought 58 as a CEO. I have
Gotcha.
$2.5 billion in exits as a CEO. I'm going to cross $1 billion this year in founder assisted exits. So
Wow.
somebody bought me a T-shirt, and it says "Exit Sherpa."
Yeah.
And so I've got 2 companies in the market right now that between the 2 of them, they'll sell for 360 million, and
Wow.
they're advanced stages of both of them at the finish line of their processes right now. And so as I've been working with entrepreneurs and helping them grow their companies, I'm riding shotgun on their exits. I'm riding shotgun on their acquisitions. So
Yeah.
I don't know how to take credit for that. I have to start a new category. So these were my personal acquisitions.
Right.
Now these are the entrepreneur assisted exits. I'll have to do something like that, but
I
but I
got
am having fun. And to be honest, I work more hours today than I did when I was a CEO, which I
you.
didn't even think was humanly possible.
Yeah.
And I am having fun. So it did
That's what
exactly
matters.
my books did what I wanted them to do. They established my credibility.
Yeah.
I have a global audience. My 71 founders that I work with literally are on every continent, around the planet. And so having fun, making a bigger impact than I did when I was kind of Oz behind the curtain as a CEO, just running one company.
Yeah.
And I figured 10 years left. So I was bored with the tactical execution, but I love the strategy, and so I help people with strategy, with education. I ride shotgun, but they own the tactical day-to-day execution.
So I have a couple of other questions, but I'm this one just popped in my head and I have to ask this. How good now you're in consulting too. So you're actually a consultant that somebody can hire
Yeah.
to do what you've done, right? Where you go out and acquire properties, do a roll up, that kind of thing, and then
Yeah.
turn around and sell it to private equity, right? So that's something somebody can hire you to do, correct? To help them?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
How does it feel helping somebody get to that place to where they end up succeeding at such an unbelievably high level
Yeah.
and you were really an integral part of it?
It's very rewarding. So in the last 12 months, I've helped 3 entrepreneurs get 9-figure exits.
Wow.
And in one case, when I started working with the gentleman, his company, he had under 2 million in earnings.
Yeah.
And he's 6 times larger now and he was worth about 15 million then,
Yeah.
worth over 200 million now, and we accomplished that in under 3 years.
Wow.
We worked together to hire a VP of business development. We worked together to secure 40 million in capital. We worked together to close 6 acquisitions. We worked together, we interviewed 7 investment banks. We hired a bank. We've been riding through the process. And so I feel like I'm Han Solo riding shotgun, with Chewie, and
Right.
my entrepreneurs, are the ones who are getting the glory now.
Yeah.
But I get the satisfaction of knowing that I've helped, and all of these people are brilliant in their own mind. They're not successful because of me. They were
No, no.
successful without me, but I'm helping them accelerate, stay
Yeah.
tuned, and again, I'm working with 71 founder-led companies right now, and it's fun. I'm in
Yeah.
a lot of industries that I had not been in before. And
Mhm.
so it's a marriage of their knowledge of an industry with my knowledge of generically knowing how to troubleshoot, grow, use M&A, position for exit, and exit, and attract top dollar and top buyers. Because I work with founders and I work with PE, I now have a dating service. I'm a matchmaker. So it's
Mhm.
like, this founder would look really good with this PE firm. Let me make that introduction. And so I've had a lot of deals close that way where no process was ever run.
Yeah.
And for me, it's never about money or fees. It's just about, can I help and be a good steward to an entrepreneur who's building a company? And then when it's time for them to exit, they're like my child,
Yeah.
almost. It's like,
Yeah.
I want them to go to a good owner. I want them to have a good experience. So rather
Mhm.
than leave that to chance, let me introduce them to some firms that I know would be really good stewards of their culture that they've built, and would take them under their wing and be let's let them have a good experience,
Yeah.
and not be one of those statistics we hear about at a mixer or something at
Mhm.
a trade show where someone's talking about the evilness of private equity,
Right.
or what a bad experience they had. So I'm protective of the companies I work with and the entrepreneurs. Yeah, I have one guy now who's exiting for an incredibly high amount of money. It's 200 million plus, and it's like, and this guy is an expert in his field, but he's a little naive. And
Mhm.
to have that kind of wealth, I am just so worried about him, his family, and him being taken advantage of, that, I'm protecting him. And,
Yeah.
let's get you to a really good wealth management firm. Let's
Yeah.
make sure that we've got a plan for trusts and next generation. And, it's like, let me introduce you to some people who can help you and be thoughtful, because I don't want to see this person taken advantage of, or to have his wealth, somehow get destroyed, post close. So I care about my clients. They become, a part of my family, and my juice is seeing them succeed.
Yeah. That protective nature that you develop as a parent never goes away.
No.
It really doesn't. And it's like you almost want to bring more and more people in that you can protect, because now you're at a place where you know more, right?
Yeah.
You have more wisdom, you have more that you can share, and you can help guide people and sort of keep them out of hot water, so to speak,
Yep.
right? And it's really, that part's got to be rewarding too.
Yeah, it's like, you're walking side by side with someone, and they're
Yeah,
about to step into a giant pothole and fall off
exactly.
the cliff, and you just happen to lift them up, right, and walk them right over the top.
Right.
They don't even know the cliff was there.
Yeah,
You
just
know?
step
So,
over here for a second, right? Walk
yeah,
this way, right?
yeah.
Okay,
So,
so I have two final questions,
okay.
and they have to do with stories that are my favorite stories from your books. Okay.
Yep.
So I want you to tell these stories real quick, if it's okay with you.
Sure.
The first one is, there's a gentleman that you approach that owns a company. You end up buying a portion of his ownership. He ends up holding on to a portion of that ownership that was worth, I want to say it was, at the time it was worth close to 4 million, but then it ends up 3 years later becoming like 14 million or 11 million or 12 million or something like that. Can you talk about that for a second, because
Yeah.
it's that story you told about when you were talking about owners holding on to part of their ownership and letting it grow with
Yeah.
you.
I tell people, it's like, most entrepreneurs think that selling their business is the end of the road.
Yeah,
It's a one and done event.
right.
Give me my wheelbarrow full of gold, and I'm going to go off and do something else. The problem is, they've spent their whole life doing this,
Yeah.
and they're going to have a non-compete. So, you give them a wheelbarrow full of gold, and they're back at
Mhm.
square one. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why do that?
And
Why sell a
what do I
great
do
company
now, right?
once? Yeah.
Emotionally, that's gotta work. That's gotta
Yeah,
wear on them.
and so, but yet there is a reason to want to diversify risk. They've
Yeah.
been working, they've got too much of their chips, in on the table in this company. They're getting older. And so, actually, in July of 22, I write an article for Forbes every month, and I wrote one in July 22. When's the right time to sell your company?
Mhm.
And I created this thing I call the rule of 130.
Mhm.
So it's your age is a 2-digit number, plus your net worth as a 2-digit number, the percent of your net worth that's tied up in your company.
Mhm.
And so I'm 60. And like most entrepreneurs, if they've got 80-90% of their net worth tied up in their company, you add those two numbers together, maybe it's 80 plus 60, that's 140. If
Mhm.
it's over 130, too much risk, too
Yeah.
much risk buried in your business. We want to sell it, not to walk away, just to get chips off the table, and like
Yeah.
a squirrel in the fall,
Right.
store it in the tree against a rainy day, because there are things out there that destroy value, and they're
Yeah.
happening quick. Wars, boy, could I tell stories about bad things that happened to people during COVID, or when the Ukraine, war broke out with Russia,
Mhm.
or right now, it's like, good Lord, the stock market's been, is down, 3,000 points in
Yeah.
48 hours. It's like, the things can happen that are beyond your control or ability to control that can destroy value. And I don't want to see, it's the protective thing. I
Yeah.
want to see entrepreneurs diversify. So having said that, so, my last roll up, the first flip, I bought 8 companies. The first guy I bought, we paid, roughly, numbers wise, it was somewhere like 16.4 million for his company, somewhere around there. And I made him roll over 4.4. Take 12 home.
Yeah.
Diversify. You're at the age where we need to diversify, but we need to keep going too.
Yeah.
Let's roll 4.4 million forward. No, I don't want to roll 4.4 forward. Just give me all my money. I can't. Sorry. I have too much risk as a buyer. I need you around, and I need you with skin in the game, because I got to maintain these relationships with these clients. So I'm not letting you leave with all your money.
Right.
Okay.
Stay in here with me a little bit, buddy.
Okay. I hope I get my money back, eventually. 7 companies later, 27 months later, I sell the company, and the company sells for 14 times EBITDA. I was buying companies at 5 times EBITDA. The investors got a 4 times multiple of invested capital. I'm not wearing the watch, or I'd show you, but it's like, my PE sponsor got us all Rolexes, and we engraved the inside, the date, and that's this deal. And so we get 4 times multiple invested capital, which means his 4.4 million times 4 is now 17.6 million.
Oh my goodness gracious. I love this story.
The first time he sold the company, he got the 16.4.
Yeah.
And 3 years later, he gets the second payday, and that one is 17.6. And so all total, because we subtract the 4.4 rollover, I don't want to double count it. So if you add up the 2 paydays, subtract the 4.4, the guy got $29.6 million.
Yeah.
In 3 years for a company he would have been very happy just selling for 16 and walking away. And so that is the power of rollover investing. And so he's got money rolled over, I've got money rolled over, we're waiting for that company to sell again, and we're not even there, And so, but eventually another payday is coming. So I can't write the last chapter on that story until the company sells one more time, but then we'll see how ultimately we did. But the moral of the story is, a lot of entrepreneurs not only think of an exit as a one and done, but they also think there's no way in the world I could be a minority shareholder, and be happy. And if I don't have control, and I'm God's gift to HVAC or whatever. And I'm like, dude, it's like, let's learn about being a minority shareholder. Have you ever heard of this guy named Elon Musk, or Jeff Bezos, and, neither one of them own 13% of their companies, and they're the 2 richest guy on the planet. So it's like, you can be a minority shareholder and you can keep on making money. It's okay. Let me show you how. And so that's that story.
I love that story. Love that story. Okay. There's one other one that I want you to tell, if it's okay.
Yep.
Where you end up buying, and I want to say, it's been a little while since I listened to the book, but I want to say it was 8 companies that you purchased, and you purchased them for exactly what the lenders were loaning on. So it was some number of EBITDA, right? Some multiple of EBITDA that they would lend. And you literally bought them for that same exact number. And the investors literally that were working with you didn't have to come out of pocket anything.
Yeah. So this is, again, same buy and build, last one. So the PE firm bought the original platform company using 50% equity, 50% debt, round numbers. And then they put their checkbooks away. We then bought 23 companies using 100% leverage.
Right.
I've sold it once, waiting for the second sale. So these are connected stories.
Yeah.
And so when we, I'm a very disciplined buyer, and I teach people, because entrepreneurs don't understand how they're making money when they're buying companies and putting them together. And so too many entrepreneurs try to buy fixer-uppers, and they think the value creation comes from taking an underperforming company and fixing it. And that's not where the value comes from.
Right.
And I'm a turnaround guy.
Yeah.
And I teach people only buy good companies run by good people, pay the fair market value for that company, because your magic does not come from fixing something that's underperforming. You want to use all your energy to just find good companies run by good people, put them together, because
Right.
as a small company gets bigger, the multiple it trades for goes up, and it's arbitrage and multiple expansion that rewards you for your effort. So if you get bogged down fixing a fixer upper,
Mhm.
you're got your eye off the ball. You're not only not running your own business, you're
Yeah.
trying to fix somebody else's, and you're trying to find other stuff to buy. And it's like, and you fail. So the entrepreneurs don't get that the value of M&A, the value of doing a buy and build, isn't from fixing something.
Right.
It's from getting bigger.
Right.
So the easiest path to getting bigger is I only buy good companies run by good people with great cultures, and I put them together. It's hard enough to integrate. And if I focus on that, and in this particular case, this industry, the companies sell for 5 times.
Yeah.
Well, if I have the owner roll over anywhere from 10 to 30%, I'm probably paying around 4 times cash.
Mhm.
And lenders, the cash flow of the companies I'm buying, can service the debt that's required to buy them. So
Right.
I don't have to come out of pocket with any further equity, and the PE firm doesn't come out of pocket with any further equity. And it's because of the PE's fund size
Mhm.
and the fact that they own 40, 50 portfolio companies, and they have such massive needs for lending capacity that banks just bend over backwards to want to invest in their deals and provide them with the capital. And they're making money not from interest, they're making money from fees, the
Mhm.
fees of closing and the fees that they're adding every time they refinance the debt, because they bought 3 more companies and they got to refinance the whole thing.
Mhm.
I once refinanced the same company 3 times in 1 year. And GE was my lead capital partner. GE Capital was, and I laughed. I got invited to GE's board dinner, and Jeff Immelt was the CEO. And I'm like, when I was at GE, I never got invited to the board damn dinner. And
Right.
here I am, ex GE, and
Right.
I'm sitting here eating dinner with the board. And it's because I was GE Capital's largest customer 1 year, because I
Wow.
refinanced a company 3 times in
Yeah.
1 year, and so it's like that's how the banks are making their money, is not the interest, but the fees that are being generated. They do make some money on interest. And so this is the perfect PE model. When PE buys the platform company, it's typically 50% debt, 50% equity.
Yeah.
That's come under pressure recently because interest rates have been higher. And so it's a little bit higher on the equity side, like 60% equity, 40% debt. Um, and they're building everything around a debt service coverage ratio of 2 to 1. For every dollar of cash flow I have, I only want to service 50 cents of debt.
Right.
So how do I get more debt? I do interest only loans, higher interest rate, but interest only, no principal service during the 5-year hold period while I'm buying a bunch of stuff, putting them together. There's a bunch of financial engineering that they do to maximize the credit capacity of a company. But the money is made by putting the companies together
Yeah.
and then integrating them and teaching them to grow now at a faster pace organically. They've gotten bigger. Bigger is rare. There's 34 million small companies in the United States. Just in the US, there's only 3,000 on the entire planet that have $1 billion in revenue.
Yeah.
2,000 are public, 1,000 are private. And so as we get bigger, we get rare. Big
And more
funds,
attractive, right?
more attractive to bigger PE funds
Right.
who can't buy small companies because they have a limited window to deploy capital. Going
Right.
back to the why I bought the PE or wrote the PE playbook, it's like
Right.
it's a 10-year fund. They've got 6 years to invest the capital. They hold a company for 5 years on average. If I'm KKR or Apollo or Carlyle or Blackstone, I've got a $30 billion fund. I can't buy small companies that take me 1,000 years to put my
Right.
money to work.
Right.
So I buy big companies, big firms buy big companies. So they're sitting around waiting. There's 1.9 trillion in dry powder sitting out there, money that's committed, looking for something to buy. And so as a company climbs the pyramid and gets up to a higher level, there's all these people waiting to buy it. And it's like, oh, hey, here's one,
Mhm.
and now they're feeding on this, and the multiples have gone up because it's a bigger company. that's where the profits made, is the arbitrage and multiple expansion. So,
Mhm.
but that was the story. So that's the same buy and build where that other story
Mhm.
occurred. It's also the same buy and build where I tell people, well, when I'm saying don't buy a fixer upper, where one of my bad acquisitions that I made in life was less than 5% of my revenue. And it caused me 80% of my headaches for the
Yeah.
next 3 years. It's like,
Yeah.
only buy good companies, run by good people with good cultures, pay fair market value. Don't try to get it for a steal, because your money is going to get made from the arbitrage of getting bigger. So that's that story.
Well, that's the beauty of what you've done. Okay. With equity, with Empire Builder, with Private Equity Playbook, with Exit Strategy Playbook, what you've done is you put together this sort of holistic deal, right? Where people now can understand that you can design a conglomerate, if you will, of companies, right? That literally fits the PE playbook. It fits what they're looking for. And
Yeah.
that's what I think is so genius about about your writing and what you teach, and ultimately what you consult on, right?
And this
So
can be done on a small scale
yeah,
with small companies and small owners.
yeah. You just add them together and build them together, right?
Exactly.
And just build the machine that you know they want to buy. That's the
Exactly.
coolest thing. That's the
Yep.
coolest thing. Okay. If somebody wants to reach you to potentially hire you as a consultant, how can they reach you?
Yep. Chairmangroup.us is
Okay.
my website. LinkedIn is where I'm most active from a social media perspective. People who
Yeah.
reach out to me on LinkedIn, I don't have a team of people. I actually look at every message coming in every day. I respond to them. I get up really early. Old Army habits, die hard. So I'm up
Yeah.
at 4 a.m. I'm usually scanning my social media, and that's when I'm actually that's when all my books are written, is before the hours of 4 and 6:30.
Yeah.
That's my quiet time for me projects.
Yeah.
So reach out to me on LinkedIn. Go to
That's how I
Chairman
reached
Group.
you, by the way.
Yeah, chairmangroup.us. You get me, I answer.
That's right. You
And
certainly
so
did. You
yeah,
certainly did.
I enjoy doing podcasts, Mike. It's been fun on this one because we went places where the
Yeah.
hundreds of other podcasts I've been on, we didn't talk about
Yeah.
these issues or these things. So this one was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you, sir. And I really, really, really appreciate you from the bottom of my heart for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. This has been an absolute, I've had so much fun. I can't even begin to explain it. But I know we'll talk again. Thank you so much for being here. I'd love to have you back on to promote your other books when you're ready. And I'd love to have you back on if you want to come back on and talk about how your conference went. So great to have you, bud. Thanks again
All
for
right.
being here.
Thanks, Mike. Good luck to all your listeners out there.
Appreciate you. Can I ask you a question? Did you know that there's a technology that uses sound waves that'll tell your brain what to do? There literally is. It's called newcalm.com. It can tell your brain to heal, tell your brain to sleep, tell your brain to do all kinds of things. It can get you fired up. It can be a pre-workout. Newcalm.com. And the promo code is Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at the Mike Litton Experience.